The day the set went silent, the desert studio outside Palm Springs was supposed to be loud that afternoon. It usually was. The clatter of equipment, the casual laughter of crew members, the echo of boots on wooden platforms, the distant hum of generators fighting the heat, all of it blended into the familiar heartbeat of a working film set. But on this day, something different hung in the air. Something heavy, something alert, as if the place itself knew a moment was approaching that wouldn't belong to any script, any camera, or any carefully rehearsed scene. Dean Martin arrived first, stepping out of his car with his usual relaxed ease. Sunglasses in place, a faint half-smile on his face. To anyone watching from a distance, he looked like the same Dean everyone thought they knew, the effortless charmer, the smooth singer, the man who never seemed rushed by anything in life. But those who truly worked with him noticed the small details, the way his eyes scanned a set before he ever stepped onto it, the way his shoulders squared when he crossed into work mode, the quiet discipline hidden beneath the velvet voice. He greeted grips, assistants and extras by name, pausing to shake hands, offering a few soft jokes that loosened the early tension. Yet today, even his humor carried a different weight. It wasn't lighter. It wasn't louder. It was calmer, focused, almost reflective. Across the open lot, a familiar silhouette appeared near the soundstage doors. John Wayne, broad-shouldered, steady, moving with that unmistakable, grounded stride that had turned him into something more than an actor, a presence. Crew members instinctively straightened when he walked by, not out of fear, out of respect. Wayne nodded to them as he passed, his face weathered by years of sun, war films, westerns, and real life alike. He and Dean spotted each other from across the lot. No wave, no show, just eye contact, a quiet acknowledgement. Two veterans recognizing another man who had survived a long road. They were scheduled to film separate scenes that day, different parts of the same picture. But something had already started circulating among the stunt team and prop masters, a casual conversation that had quietly grown teeth. A younger consultant brought in to choreograph a quick-draw moment for a background scene. Been boasting all morning about speed. How new techniques made the old Western style outdated. How reaction time was everything. How modern shooters could outdraw any of the legends. It wasn't said with cruelty, but it was said with confidence. And confidence, when overheard by men who had spent their lives earning every ounce of theirs, has a way of becoming a challenge without ever asking to be one. Dean heard about it while Wardrobe adjusted his jacket. He listened without interrupting, eyes steady, fingers lightly brushing the cuff of his sleeve. John Wayne heard it from a props assistant who meant no harm repeating it. Wayne didn't react immediately either. He simply asked a quiet question. Where is he? Not angrily. Not sharply. Just a question. The consultant, a talented, fast, energetic young man, stood near the practice area where prop firearms were always checked and cleared. He was demonstrating hand speed to a small cluster of crew, spinning an unloaded revolver with casual flair. His movements were impressive. No one could deny that. When he noticed Dean and Wayne approaching from opposite sides, he froze for half a second, then straightened. Conversations around them softened. Even the wind seemed to lower its voice. John Wayne spoke first. "Son," he said, not unkindly, "I hear you're fast." The young man swallowed, then smiled. "Yes, sir. That's kind of my specialty." Dean tilted his head slightly, studying him the way a musician studies a note. "Fast is a good thing," he said calmly. "But it's not the only thing." The consultant laughed nervously. "No disrespect, Mr. Martin. Mr. Wayne, I just meant techniques changed. People today train different." Wayne nodded slowly. "They always have." Dean's voice stayed soft. "And they always will. The question is, what stays when the speed fades?" Someone nearby chuckled, trying to ease the tension. It didn't work. The air had already thickened into something attentive. Not hostile, expectant. The consultant hesitated, then gestured toward the practice markers. "I was just running a little demonstration for the crew. Safe. Cleared, of course." John Wayne took one more step forward. Mind if we watch? Of course not, sir, Dean added gently. If we join you. That was when the set truly went quiet. They checked the revolvers together. Chambers open. Hands visible. No shortcuts. No showmanship. Just ritual. Respect. Process. When they stepped into position, it wasn't framed like a duel. There were no dramatic stares. No taunts. No raised voices. It looked almost instructional. 3 men standing in the sun. 1 eager. 2 grounded. The consultant demonstrated first. His draw was lightning, clean, controlled. The revolver cleared the holster and aligned in one smooth motion. A few crew members murmured approval. It was impressive. John Wayne nodded once. Dean clapped lightly. That was beautiful, he said honestly. Then something happened that surprised everyone. John Wayne didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he spoke. Speed, he said, comes from the body. Skill comes from the years. And judgment. Judgment comes from how many times you've been wrong and stood back up anyway. He looked at the young man. You're fast. But do you know why you're fast? The consultant hesitated. Training, I guess. Reps. Dean smiled faintly. Exactly. Repetition. And repetition builds something deeper than motion. It builds calm. He finally placed his hand near his holster. And calm, he said, is what stays when everything else shakes. They took their positions again. Not to compete. To demonstrate, no one called action. No one needed to. When Dean Martin drew, it wasn't explosive. It was inevitable. As if the movement had already been decided long before his hand moved. The revolver rose into position with no wasted motion, no flourish, no urgency. It simply arrived where it was meant to be. When John Wayne followed, the effect was even more striking. There was no speed for speed's sake. There was presence, a groundedness that made the moment feel larger than it was. Not faster than the consultants. Draw dot heavier. Truer. The crew didn't clap this time. They didn't speak. They stood very still. Because something had just passed. Between those 3 men that cameras could never record. A transmission of weight, of history, of what remains when youth no longer carries the whole load. The consultant slowly lowered his hand. His voice came quieter. I didn't mean any disrespect. John Wayne shook his head. None taken, Dean added, and none needed. Curiosity isn't disrespect, but wisdom starts when curiosity learns to listen. The young man exhaled. I've never seen it look so easy. Dean's eyes softened. It isn't easy. It's just no longer loud. Director finally cleared his throat. Someone laughed awkwardly. The spell broke, but the feeling didn't. Crew members returned to work, but slower now, thoughtful, as if something invisible had been rearranged inside them. Later, as Dean and John walked toward their stages, Wayne spoke quietly. They think legends are built on moments. Dean nodded. They're built on mornings no one sees. Neither of them knew yet that what had just happened would ripple far beyond this set. That the young consultant would carry that silence into every room he ever walked into again. That a dozen crew members would one day tell their own children about the afternoon when speed lost to stillness. That this small, unscripted exchange would become a private legend whispered across decades. And they didn't know that. Before this production was over, circumstances would force both of them to confront the one test no amount of fame, skill, or discipline ever truly prepares a man for. The moment when the world no longer asks how fast you are, only who you are. The incident on the practice lot should have faded into another quiet footnote of studio life, but it didn't. It followed people. It followed them into lunch tents, into lighting trucks, into the corners where cigarette smoke curled like question marks. Something about what had happened between Dean Martin and John Wayne and that young consultant had unsettled the rhythm of the set. Not in a disruptive way, in a reverent one, as though everyone had been briefly reminded that the men whose names were printed in heavy type on the call sheets were not simply performers drifting through roles, but vessels carrying entire decades of discipline, failure, reinvention, and private endurance. And the strange part was that neither Dean nor Wayne spoke of it again. They moved back into their work with the same steady professionalism they always had. Yet those who watched closely noticed the shift, the way directors hesitated before giving notes, the way younger actors lingered longer when either man spoke, the way conversations softened when either of them entered a space. Not because of fame, but because of gravity. That afternoon, Dean found himself alone on a soundstage between setups, seated on the edge of a wooden crate. Watching dust dance through a blade of light cut by the half-open doors, the laughter he was known for had quieted. Not vanished, just folded inward. He rolled a silver ring slowly around his finger, an old habit that appeared whenever he was thinking more than he was showing. For years, the world had decided who he was, the smooth one, the effortless one, the man who never carried the weight others did. And he had allowed them to believe it, not because it was true, but because sometimes an image is a shelter. People rarely look behind a smile they think they understand. But lately, that shelter had been thinning. The years were beginning to ask questions he couldn't answer with charm alone. About pace, about relevance, about what remained when applause thinned into memory. Across the lot, in a quieter wing of the studio, John Wayne stood in front of a wardrobe mirror while a costumer adjusted the shoulders of his jacket. He watched his own reflection, not critically, but carefully. He noticed things now he hadn't when he was younger, the way his eyes no longer burned, but steadied. The way his posture came from alignment rather than force. He had built his career on strength, on resilience, on men who didn't bend. Yet real life had taught him that the strongest things often bent first, and then returned. The morning's moment with the young consultant had stirred something in him too. Not pride, responsibility, because he had seen in the young man's eyes what he himself once carried, the hunger to arrive. To prove to outrun time before it could lay a hand on his shoulder. The next scene scheduled was a simple one. Too simple, some thought. Dean and Wayne were to share a brief exchange in a quiet interior set. Nothing dramatic, nothing physical. Just dialogue, just presence. It should have been routine. But something went wrong. Not with the equipment. With the mood, the lights came up. The camera rolled, and on the first take, the words landed. Flat, technically correct, emotionally hollow. The director called cut, puzzled. He asked for another, and another. Each time, the lines were delivered perfectly, and each time, they failed to carry weight. The crew grew uneasy. They had just witnessed both men command silence hours earlier, without speaking a word, and now, surrounded by cameras and cues. Something essential refused to surface. Finally, the director lowered his clipboard. Let's take 5. 5 became 15. No one left. Dean remained seated in his mark, hands resting loosely on his knees. John stood nearby, hat in his hand. Neither man spoke at first. Then, Wayne stepped closer, his voice low. You're holding back. Dean looked up slowly. So are you. Wayne exhaled through his nose. We don't usually do that. Dean's smile was faint. We usually hide it better. Eh? There was no accusation in his tone. Only recognition. They moved off the set, not far, just beyond the lights, where shadows softened the edges of everything. Crew members pretended not to listen, which meant they listened to every word. You feel it too, don't you? Dean said. Wayne nodded. The room's changed, not the room, Dean replied quietly. Us. That was when John Wayne did something few people ever saw. He sat down, not heavily, deliberately, he said. When I started, I thought strength was volume, presence, the ability to fill a frame. Then I learned it was endurance, the ability to stay when others burned out. Now he paused, searching. Now I think it's truth, and truth is heavier than both. Dean listened, eyes steady. Truth doesn't project, he said. It settles. Wayne studied him, What are you settling with? Dean didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice carried no performance. The fear that one day the version of me people applaud will walk onto a stage, and I won't be there anymore. Wayne's jaw tightened slightly, not in shock. In understanding, they think we live in moments, Dean continued, but we live between them. In the quiet after, in the mornings before, in the nights when the applause doesn't come home with you. Wayne nodded. And that's where the real work is. The director approached carefully. Everything okay, gentlemen? Dean looked at Wayne. Wayne looked back. Better than okay, Wayne said. We were lying to the scene, Dean added, and it noticed. They asked for one more take. No resets, no rehearsals. Just one. The lights rose again. The slate clapped. The room leaned forward. This time when Dean spoke, his voice didn't float. It grounded. Each word carried the weight of what had just been said in shadow. When Wayne replied, it wasn't the sound of a hero. It was the sound of a man who had walked long enough to know the difference between standing tall and standing true. The silence between their lines became as important as the lines themselves. And somewhere between camera and breath, something extraordinary happened. The scene disappeared. What remained was presence. When the director whispered, "Cut," no one moved. No one clapped. The stillness felt earned, like the pause after a prayer. Then quietly, someone exhaled, and another, and another. The spell released later that evening. The young consultant stood at the edge of the lot, waiting, unsure why he was there. He only knew he didn't want to leave yet. Dean passed first. The young man straightened. "Mr. Martin." Dean stopped. "Call me Dean." The consultant hesitated. "I've been fast my whole life," he said. "Today was the first time I realized I don't know where I'm going." Dean studied him gently. "Good," he said. "That means you've arrived at the right question." Moments later, John Wayne joined them. The young man looked between them. "How did you know?" When to stop trying to prove it. Wayne's answer came slow. When the work stopped asking, sun was setting now, painting the studio walls gold. Long shadows stretched across the ground like unfinished sentences, and none of them knew yet that before this production ended, a crisis far from the cameras would demand more than calm, more than speed. More than skill, it would demand a choice. One that would test not how they performed, but how they stood when no one was watching. Night came down on the studio in layers. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but the way real nights arrives, lowly, almost politely, until the light realizes it is already lost. Most of the crew had gone. The last generators hummed like distant insects. A few windows still glowed along the edge of the lot, and beyond them, the desert stretched dark and patient. As if it had been waiting for this exact quiet, Dean Martin remained. Not because he had to, because something in him hadn't settled yet. He walked the perimeter of the set with his jacket draped over his arm, the echo of the day still moving through him. The strange gravity of the morning's moment, the hollow takes, the truth-filled one that followed. And then the conversation at sunset that had landed heavier than he'd expected. When the work stops asking, the phrase kept returning, not as comfort. As a challenge, John Wayne was still there too. He sat alone in a folding chair near one of the closed sound stages, hat resting on his knee, hands folded loosely over it. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was listening. To the quiet, to the body he had spent a lifetime commanding, to the subtle messages it now sent instead of obeyed. There had been a tightness in his chest earlier. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would stop a shoot, but enough to remind him that endurance does not mean immunity. He watched a moth drift through a pool of light, collide softly with the bulb, then settle again. Persistence without panic. He found something in it that felt instructive. They noticed each other at nearly the same time. Dean approached without a word and took the chair beside him. They sat like that for a while, two silhouettes in an almost empty world. "Ever feel," Dean said finally, "like the noise follows you even when it's gone?" Wayne nodded. "That's when you find out if you like the man it leaves behind." Dean breathed out slowly. I'm not sure people know that man. Wayne turned slightly. Do you? Dean hesitated. Then, honestly, I'm getting there. Sudden sound cut through the quiet, not loud. Wrong. A hurried voice. A scramble of footsteps. A call for help that wasn't meant for cameras. They stood at the same time, at the far end of the lot. Near the prop storage trailers, a small knot of people had formed. A lighting assistant was down. Sitting, but struggling. One hand braced against a crate, the other pressed tight to his side. His face had gone pale in a way that didn't belong to the night. Someone was already calling for medical support, their voice too controlled, which meant fear had just arrived and was trying not to be seen. Dean and Wayne didn't run. They moved, and the way they moved parted the moment. Dean reached him first, lowering himself carefully, speaking before asking, grounding before assessing. Easy? Easy. You're all right. What's your name? Tom, the man said, breath thin. Tom, Dean repeated, as if anchoring him to something solid. Stay with me, Tom. Look at me. John Wayne crouched on the other side, not crowding, not commanding, just present. He didn't touch him at first. He watched. The breathing, the tension, the way the man's hand trembled against his ribs. Where does it hurt? Here, Tom whispered. Hard to. Breathe. Wayne placed 2 fingers gently at Tom's wrist. Found the pulse, fast, uneven. He looked up at Dean. Their eyes exchanged no drama, only information. Dean leaned closer. Help's coming. You're not alone. Just breathe with me. He inhaled slowly, exaggerated, patient. He exhaled. Again and again. Tom's breathing began, gradually to follow. Someone brought water. Wayne shook his head once. Not yet. The desert wind brushed across them, cool now, carrying dust and something metallic from the trailers. The generator hum faded as someone shut it down. And with it went the last illusion of a set. This was no longer a place where problems were solved in post. This was where presence mattered. Tom, Wayne said, voice low, steady. You married? Tom nodded faintly. Kids? 1 little girl. Wayne's hand closed gently over Tom's wrist, not to restrain, but to connect. Then you stay. You hear me? You stay. Tom's eyes filled, not with tears, but with focus. The ambulance lights arrived in the distance before the sound. Blue and red threading through dark. Crew members stepped back. Medics moved in. Professional, quick, efficient. But even as they worked, one of them glanced up briefly at Dean and Wayne, recognition flickering across his face. Celebrity. Gratitude. For having something steady already there. As they loaded Tom onto the stretcher, his fingers reached weakly and caught Dean's sleeve. Thank you, he whispered. Dean covered his hand. We didn't do anything, he said. Tom shook his head faintly. You stayed. The doors closed. The siren didn't wail. It pulsed, urgent, alive. When the ambulance disappeared beyond the gate, the lot felt different. Smaller, quieter, realer. Neither man spoke right away. Then Wayne said, That's what they never put in the scripts. Dean nodded, the part where nobody's watching. They walked slowly back toward the center of the lot. The lights now were security lights. White, unforgiving, honest. You felt it earlier, Wayne said. The tightness, the questions, the weight. That wasn't age. Dean looked at him. That, Wayne continued, was the work asking. They stopped near the same practice area where the morning's moment had unfolded, the chalk marks still faint on the ground. The air still holding the memory of speed. Dean looked down at his hands. All these years, he said quietly, I thought legacy was what people said after. Wayne shook his head once. Legacy is what happens when something goes wrong and you don't leave. Dean let the words settle in the distance. The desert made its own kind of silence. Wide, endless, unimpressed. Somewhere beyond it, a man was on his way to a hospital. A daughter was about to hear a phone ring. A wife would press her hand to her mouth. Life, unfilmed, was moving and standing there beneath borrowed light. Dean Martin felt something shift, not dramatically, not painfully, but decisively, as if a door he had been performing in front of his whole life had quietly opened behind him, and he understood suddenly that the true test of everything he had built was not waiting in a scene, it was waiting in what he chose to carry back with him into the light. What he didn't yet know was that the next day would demand more than presence. It would demand courage, not the kind that fills theaters, the kind that changes people. Morning returned to the studio not as a beginning, but as a question. The sun climbed slowly over the distant ridge, its light spilling across empty trailers and silent sound stages, touching them without waking them. The desert did not rush. It never had, and perhaps that was why it felt like the right witness to what was coming. Dean Martin arrived earlier than usual, not out of duty. Out of restlessness, he walked alone across the lot, hands in his pockets, the echo of the ambulance's fading siren still threading through his thoughts. He had spent a lifetime stepping into light. Today, he felt the weight of stepping into something quieter, something that didn't applaud. John Wayne arrived not long after. He didn't look tired. He looked resolved. There was a steadiness in him that morning that hadn't been there before, as if something inside had finished rearranging itself in the night. They met near the craft table without greeting, only nodding once, like men who had already spoken enough. "Any word?" Dean asked. Wayne nodded. "He's stable. Doctors say he was lucky." Dean closed his eyes briefly, not in relief but in gratitude. "Lucky," he repeated. Wayne's voice lowered. "Luck notices who stays." Filming resumed. Schedules always do. Scenes were blocked, lines adjusted, lights raised. On paper, it was another workday. But the air was different. The crew moved with a gentler precision, as if every cable and stand carried more meaning than yesterday. When Dean stepped onto the set, there was no casual chatter. When Wayne joined him, even the seasoned grip slowed, not because of stardom, because something in them had shifted from watching performances to witnessing people. The scene scheduled was the most demanding one of the film. Not physically, emotionally. Two men facing each other after a long conflict. Neither raised in voice, neither victorious, both changed. It had been rewritten overnight, not by writers, by life. The director gathered them briefly. "We don't need to push," he said carefully. "If you want to take it easy," Wayne shook his head. Dean smiled faintly. "We're not here to take it easy." They took their places. The set was dressed like a simple interior. Wooden walls, 2 chairs, a window where light could fall. Nothing else. No spectacle to hide behind. When the camera rolled, something extraordinary happened. They did not act. They remembered. Dean's first line emerged not from projection, but from presence. His voice carried the texture of nights, of quiet walks, of unspoken fears and unsung victories. John Wayne's response was not heroic. It was human. There was restraint in it, and in that restraint lived more power than volume ever could. The space between them filled with what neither of them had ever been able to script: consequence. Years of choosing to stand when it was easier to leave. Years of carrying expectation without letting it define them. Years of learning that strength is not the absence of fracture, but the art of return. Somewhere during the scene, Dean felt it, the shift, not in the room, in himself, the strange loosening. The release of something he had been bracing for so long, he no longer recognized the tension. He wasn't performing ease, he was in it. When Wayne delivered his final line, there was a pause written into the script. They didn't use it, they created one, a long one, the kind that belongs only to moments when truth has finished speaking, and the world hasn't yet decided what to do. With it, no one called cut, because no one could. When the director finally found his voice, it was quieter than the room. That's the one. Still, no one moved. Then, from the back of the set, a sound broke the silence. A soft, unsteady clap. It was the young consultant. He stood alone. Hands coming together not loudly, but deliberately. Once, twice, then others joined. Not the explosive applause of premieres. The slow, rising acknowledgement of something that had not entertained them, but taught them. After the crew dispersed, Dean and Wayne remained seated in their marks. "You felt it," Wayne said. Dean nodded. "I wasn't trying to be anything." "That's what you were," Wayne replied. They stood and stepped off the set together. The young consultant approached again, but this time there was no nervousness in him, only clarity. "I went to the hospital before dawn," he said. "Tom's awake. He asked me to thank you." Dean swallowed. Wayne inclined his head. The young man hesitated. "I thought speed was my gift. Yesterday, I realized it was my shield." Dean looked at him gently. "And today?" Wayne asked. "Today," he said, "I want to build something that doesn't need one." Dean smiled, not with charm, but with quiet approval. Later, as the sun lowered again, Dean found himself standing at the edge of the lot, watching shadows stretch across the ground like long memories. Wayne joined him, hands resting on his belt. "Funny thing," Dean said. "People think the hardest part is getting here." Wayne shook his head. "The hardest part is deciding who you are once you arrive." Dean breathed in the evening air. "I used to think I had to stay the man they met." Wayne turned to him. "No, you have to become the man you meet." They stood in silence, and in that silence lived the truth that no script had ever given them. But life finally had. That speed fades, that skill endures. But what remains, what truly remains, is the quiet gravity of who you choose to be. When there is nothing left to prove, not when the lights are brightest, but when they go out.